Let's talk about de-dollarization, because what's unfolding right now isn't just serious. It's seismic. The moment the G7 froze Russian assets, the global financial order felt a tremor. That wasn't just a policy move, it was a signal, loud and irreversible. Biden's decision to align with Europe and lock down Russia's reserves may have scored diplomatic points. But financially, it shattered something foundational. Trust. Trust in the US dollar. Trust in the neutrality of Western finance. Trust in the idea that money parked in America is safe no matter what. And if you're thinking Trump might have undone the damage, he didn't. His trade wars only accelerated it. His tariffs turned up the heat, making it painfully clear that the US is willing to weaponize its economic systems, trade, finance, infrastructure, as tools of foreign policy. It's a flex that plays well at rallies, but it comes at a price. Right now, foreign investors are holding about $19 trillion in US stocks, $7 trillion in government bonds, and another $5 trillion in credit assets. That's over $30 trillion in exposure. Just in Treasuries alone, foreigners own nearly a third of the entire market. This isn't marginal capital. This is what keeps borrowing costs in the US low. This is what keeps the debt machine humming. But every time the US sharpens its economic edge, that trust erodes. And every time the rhetoric around protectionism escalates, capital gets a little more nervous. Trump loves to hammer the trade deficit like it's public enemy number one. But what he ignores is the other side of the equation, the capital account surplus. For decades, that surplus has been the quiet powerhouse, giving the US the ability to borrow globally at ultra-low rates. The trade deficit pulls money out, the capital surplus brings it back in. It's been a finely balanced dance. But now the music is changing, not just because central banks are buying fewer treasuries. Something deeper is shifting. A structural rethinking of the dollar's role is underway, and it's already starting to materialize. Take Brazil. They're preparing to issue Panda bonds, debt denominated in Chinese yuan. That might sound technical, but it's monumental. For decades, if you wanted to borrow on favorable terms, you did it in dollars. The dollar's reserve status meant liquidity, confidence, low interest rates, and no currency risk. Everyone wanted dollar-denominated debt. Lula could borrow today at historically low rates just by sticking with the status quo. Brazil is a major exporter. In 2024 alone, they ran a $74 billion trade surplus, most of it in dollars. Borrowing against those future surpluses? Easy. Standard playbook. But now that playbook is getting burned. Tariffs, trade wars, financial unpredictability. Countries are rethinking their exposure to the dollar. Brazil just issued a 10-year dollar bond at 6.73%. US Treasuries? Around 4.5%. If US yields keep climbing, Brazil could be staring down 7%, 8% borrowing costs. But Panda bonds? They're coming in at 2%. That's not just cheaper, it's a third of the cost. Sure, borrowing in yuan introduces currency risk. But China controls the yuan's trading band. They don't leave it to the markets. Meanwhile, the dollar is bouncing all over the place. Today it's down. Tomorrow it might spike. Tariffs get lifted or reimposed. Rates climb again. In that kind of volatility, dollar debt turns radioactive. Now factor this in. Brazil has a growing trade surplus with China. They're exporting more to Beijing than they're importing, roughly 313 billion yuan, or $44 billion. And as China cuts US food imports, Brazil steps in to fill the gap. That trade flow is only expanding, which means Brazil is accumulating yuan. And with more yuan, they have more collateral, more reason to issue Panda bonds. And every new Panda bond issued strengthens China's financial ecosystem while weakening the dollar's dominance. It's a feedback loop, and it's already spinning. Washington isn't prepared for this. The dream of reshoring, bringing manufacturing back home, sounds patriotic on paper. But the cost is global trade. The cost is the dollar's role as reserve currency. The cost is America's ability to borrow cheap and run massive deficits. You can't have it all. You can't shield your industries, command the world's reserve currency, and finance trillions in debt at bargain rates. Something has to give. And then there's China. For years, economists have begged Beijing to rebalance, stimulate domestic consumption, reduce export dependency. Well, here we are. But be careful what you wish for. China is staring down deflation. Consumer prices aren't rising, they're falling. CPI is forecast at just 0.3%. That gives Beijing a rare weapon. The power to inject massive stimulus without overheating the economy. No inflation risk means no constraint. They can spend, they can lend, they can reshape global capital flows. And they're starting with countries like Brazil, willing partners in a world slowly, steadily pulling away from the dollar. What we're watching isn't just a trend, it's the early chapters of a global reordering. The dollar isn't gone. It's still the giant. But for the first time in generations, it's not untouchable. If US-China trade talks collapse, And that's no longer a distant possibility, but something inching closer with each passing day. China won't sit on its hands. They'll react instantly, forcefully, and with strategic precision. The People's Bank of China will slash the reserve requirement ratio, releasing a flood of new credit into the economy. Loans will surge, liquidity will overflow, and yields will tumble. China will start buying its own sovereign debt in bulk, flooding the domestic market with cash, sending Panda bond demand soaring, and pulling global capital out of U.S. Treasuries. And that's just the first domino. While China injects stimulus and opens the monetary floodgates, the United States will find itself boxed in, cornered, trapped by its own imbalance. Unlike China, America isn't facing a liquidity drought. It's facing the opposite. It's spending too much, borrowing too much, and now facing a market that is demanding higher returns just to hold its debt. Investors are beginning to flinch, not just at the size of the deficit, not just at the persistent inflation, but at the foundations of the dollar itself. If China starts importing more, drawing in more capital, more trade, more investment, while American yields rise and deficits balloon, the dollar begins to lose its gravitational pull. That's not theoretical. That's market math. So what options does Washington really have? It can't fuel more demand, not in the middle of a tariff war. The only tool left is to hit the brakes on supply. That means slashing government spending, freezing out new programs, reining in debt. That's the high-stakes calculation behind Besson's so-called beautiful bill. But it's not just about the budget. It's about defending the central pillar of American global power, the dollar's supremacy. And while this internal crisis brews in the U.S., the world outside isn't waiting. It's moving. A headline hits: Japan is quietly buying Russian oil again. 2 years of compliance, 2 years of energy drought suddenly broken. The sanctions are still officially in place, but they're starting to show fractures. Trump says he wants to bring the war to an end. The EU, meanwhile, is tightening the screws. Ursula von der Leyen is pushing to cut the oil price cap from $60 to $45. Not just that, she wants Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines permanently shut down. Full embargo. No Russian gas to Europe ever again. But this isn't just about energy or diplomacy. It's about financial architecture. It's about economic sovereignty. This is currency warfare. This is monetary fragmentation at a global scale. We are witnessing the slow, chaotic unraveling of a world built on a single assumption: that the US dollar would remain king. That assumption is fading. The West is turning back to its playbook: cut Putin's energy revenue. The logic is simple, the strategy familiar, but the timing feels off, almost reckless. Why now? Why escalate at a moment when the global economy is already fragile? When Trump's 20% tariff war is coming back to life? The effects of this are painfully predictable. Take cheap Russian energy off the table, and you create a chain reaction. Higher input costs, soaring prices, squeezed margins, shrinking exports. Factor in trade tariffs, and suddenly selling to the US becomes unviable. Economies stall, factories slow, growth grinds down. And who steps into the void? China. With every sanction imposed, every pipeline rerouted, China tightens its grip. Russia doesn't collapse, it redirects. Putin doesn't fall back, he reorients. Oil that once flowed west is now flowing east. Asia, not Europe, becomes the center of energy gravity. It's already happened, over and over again for the last 3 years. Europe seems to forget this every time the headlines shift. And now, one of America's closest allies is breaking ranks. Japan, a core G7 partner, is no longer pretending. A Japanese refiner just bought Russian crude, the first in 2 years. It's not an accident. It's not rebellion. It's math. Energy economics don't care about geopolitics. Sanctions don't erase the basic law of supply and demand. Japan needs energy to survive. And in their world, affordability is everything. Energy powers the entire system: manufacturing, shipping, transportation, agriculture, exports. Countries like Japan, China, and Vietnam can't function without it. Pull affordable fuel out of the system and the entire economic structure begins to buckle. Japan's move isn't a gamble, it's calculated. They purchased 600,000 barrels of Russian crude, delivered on a blacklisted tanker. But the transaction was legal. Why? Because Japan has something rare. A waiver from the Biden administration, quietly granted during a more pragmatic era in US diplomacy. That waiver turns everything upside down. It gives Japan the legal authority to buy Russian oil, even from sanctioned sources. So what now? If Europe is serious about a full energy ban, it would need to sanction Japan. That's the uncomfortable part of modern sanctions. They're not precision weapons. They're blunt force tools that hurt indiscriminately. And when the global system is fragmenting, even allies start looking out for themselves. Japan is doing just that, and they have to. Japan imports over 80% of its energy, over 90% when it comes to oil. It's a highly industrialized country with virtually no natural resources of its own. Their economy runs on imported energy, and the machine is slowing. Since February, Japanese export growth has declined. The first 20 days of May? Negative. Exports down 3%. For most countries, that's manageable. For Japan, it's an alarm bell. June is already looking worse. Add to that Trump's returning steel tariffs, and the pressure intensifies. Over $1 billion of Japanese steel exports are now exposed. If those tariffs hold, even at a modest 10%, Japan will be forced to rewrite its industrial playbook. This isn't just about maintaining growth. It's about stopping economic blood loss. And when survival is on the line, the choice is narrow. Energy becomes the pressure point. Cut input costs fast or lose competitiveness entirely. But Japan's not just fighting tariffs or inflation. It's locked in a head-to-head battle with China. And China is playing hardball. One of China's energy giants, VYD, just dropped prices by 34%. That's not a glitch, it's part of a long game. This is the third straight year of systematic discounting by Chinese state enterprises. It's not a price cut. It's a war strategy. A coordinated state-backed economic offensive. Japan can't afford to stay on the sidelines. Their subsidies are drying up. Public patience is thinning. The political appetite to keep overpaying for energy, just to stay on Washington's good side, is evaporating. In this environment, buying Russian oil isn't treason. It's survival. It's logic. And Japan won't be alone. Other countries, quietly, discreetly, will follow. Russian energy is not disappearing. It's rerouting. The belief that sanctions alone could crush Russia's economy was always a convenient illusion. And the oil price cap? It's nothing more than a headline barrier against a tidal shift in global alignment. This is the new normal. Fragmented, unpredictable, necessity-driven geopolitics. There's no grand alliance. No unified West. Just countries making deals to survive. Every government is playing its own version of realpolitik. Every alliance is conditional. Every rule is negotiable. Japan has made its move. Survival over symbolism. And now the question becomes, who's next? Will the BRICS nations accelerate their efforts, issuing new renminbi-denominated bonds to bypass the Western financial system entirely? Will other US-aligned nations start striking under-the-radar energy deals with Moscow while giving public lip service to sanctions? The world is shifting. Fast. The structure is cracking. And the idea of a stable, rules-based international order built on American economic leadership, that might already belong to history. The new game is here. And no one's playing by the old rules anymore.